This is my bathtub, and I'm going to sail it 50 kilometers across the Atlantic Ocean to the Scilly Isles, a small group of islands off the coast of the UK, turning a silly idea I first had as a child into reality, inspired by a drawing I made 24 years ago and encouraged by my 6-year-old Max. I finally decided to attempt this ridiculous journey, even though the bathtub couldn't float on its own and the Atlantic is known for massive waves and dangerous conditions, so with the help of engineers Mike and Neil, I set out to transform the bathtub into a seaworthy vessel by building a strong metal frame beneath it, supported by large pipes like skis, carefully measuring, cutting, and assembling each piece despite having almost no construction experience beyond flat-pack furniture and Lego, knowing that one loose bolt or wrong screw could spell disaster, all in pursuit of crossing open ocean in the silliest way possible and hosting the first ever festival in one of the most ridiculous locations on Earth. As the build continued, my confidence took a hit when I realized I'd made a basic mistake by cutting one of the steel bars too short, which meant an embarrassing trip back to buy a new one, and even after fixing that, my complete lack of craftsmanship became obvious as I struggled for hours to tighten dozens of bolts, constantly getting tools stuck and having to phone engineer Neil to explain, in painfully simple terms, how a socket set works, turning the whole process into a frustrating battle. And just when I thought I was making progress, the seriousness of the challenge fully sank in during a safety meeting with Alex and George, who laid out the harsh reality of the journey, treating it like a marathon on the Atlantic with rocks, heavy swell, strong sun exposure, cold water, and the danger of crossing busy shipping channels, along with the very real possibility of having to abandon the bathtub if the weather turned. Yet despite all the warnings and the growing doubts, I stubbornly chose to continue, finishing the build by adding large flotation tubes cut from sewage pipes to act as skis beneath the metal frame, finally giving my ridiculous bathtub boat a fighting chance of staying afloat in one of the most unforgiving stretches of water in the world. As I drilled the final holes, my bathtub was finally ready to be assembled just in time for engineer Neil to arrive and lend a hand, and after fitting the last pieces together along with a small and very avoidable workplace injury, the metal frame was complete, allowing the bath to be placed proudly on top of its floating base, and after a few careful adjustments, my strange creation finally looked like something that might actually survive water. So the next day, with the sailing team gathered and a small crowd watching nervously, I lowered it into a local marina to see whether it would sink or swim, officially naming it Billy the Bathtub, and to my huge relief it stayed afloat, felt surprisingly stable, and even survived my extremely professional wave simulations. But while this successful test was comforting, I knew that crossing the Atlantic would be a completely different challenge with towering waves, strong winds, cold water, shipping lanes, and strict safety limits that only allowed the journey if the waves stayed under 2 meters. So after weeks of waiting, a rare weather window suddenly appeared, turning the entire plan into a now or never moment, forcing us to rush south before an incoming storm caught up with us. And with nerves running high, I added final upgrades to Billy, including extra flotation, a rubber duck, a seat, an engine, and even a homemade bucket for bailing water, realizing that this wasn't just about silliness but about finally fulfilling a dream I'd had since childhood, inspired by a drawing I made decades ago of myself sailing the sea in a bathtub. And as the crew prepared, the boat was blessed, the storm loomed dangerously close, and with no excuses and no way back, I stepped into my little bathtub, ready to answer the call of the ocean and attempt something ridiculous, risky, and unforgettable. One man, one bathtub, and one very big adventure.